Thanks, guys.
All right. I'd say something about the Bucks winning, but I really, really don't want the Bucks to win. So, go Chiefs. And it's not because I'm a Chiefs fan. It's because I'm not a Tom Brady fan. That's just it. All right. On your notes, I put John 9 as the verses. It is actually Mark. So apparently I was thinking of John. So if you're a John and you're watching the live stream, I was thinking of you while I was writing these notes. So there you go. We have been talking about doubt. Not last week, because last week was our missions convention, but the week before, Pastor X talked about Paul and how we can learn through doubt. And this week, I want to talk about doubt and specifically help my unbelief. So many of us struggle with doubts in our own lives, not necessarily with Christ, but we do too with Christ too. But I want to see how we can address doubts in a Christian way, how we can address doubts in the way that we need to. But before we get into that, how many of you remember when you were a kid? Some of you, it's so like Don. Don remembers really easy because he was a kid just a little bit ago, so it's all good. But sorry, Don. But how many remember your kid? You were learning to ride your bike, and that first time your parents popped out that little tiny bike and had the training wheels, and you're sitting there looking. Don's like, no, I skipped training wheels. See, he's so baller that he skipped training wheels. All right, but you had that first bike with those training wheels, and you looked at your parents. You're like, you want me to ride that? Seriously? I know the training wheels are there to help me, but you want me to ride that? And you had these doubts in your mind when you got on it that those training wheels were going to work exactly the way they were supposed to work. I don't know about you, but I got on there and I was like, I'm going to die on this thing, all right? It's going to take my life. My parents are just trying to get rid of me, right? But, right, Don's like, right. They worked the way they were supposed to. The training wheels most of the time worked the way they were supposed to. I did things with that bike you weren't supposed to do with a bike, and I fell over anyways. But then, remember that first time when your training wheels came off? And you're like, all right, I just got used to this stinking thing with training wheels, and now you're taking my only safety net away that I won't die with, and now you want me to ride this thing without training wheels. I really thought at that point my parents were just out to get me, and maybe my little sister was too. She's just like, do it, Dad, do it, right? But it worked. Even though I had doubts that it would work, after a few times it worked. Funniest story about me learning to ride a bike is my dad let go and I was driving along. I'm like, I got this. And then I look up and there's a car parked right in front of me. And I'm like, I don't know how to turn without training wheels. What's going on? And all of a sudden, boom, just slammed right into that. See, I knew how to ride the bike a little bit, but I still had doubts because I didn't know how to turn. And it kept going on. That first time you decided you wanted to jump off the curb, you had doubts. That first time you decided you wanted to pop up the curb, you had doubts. You're like, this is not going to go the way I planned. Maybe if you were like me, that first time you built that homemade ramp, you're like, the bike's fine, but that ramp is sketchy. All right, I'm going to die with the ramp. Or when you kept growing, even though you had rode your bike for many years, when you'd go down a big hill, you'd freak out. I mean, there's not many of them here, but you have to go like south or north to get to them. But when you go down a big hill, you'd freak out. When you hit a patch of gravel, you'd have doubts that you'd make it through the gravel. I had a friend who, it was a tandem bike, and her and her dad hit this patch of gravel on a tandem, and they biked for fun, like long distance, 20 miles. I'm like, you guys are nuts. But they hit a patch of gravel, and they wiped out. So even though we kept going with these bike, and we knew how to ride it, and we had experience, we had doubts in our lives. We had doubts that we couldn't ride that bike the way it was supposed to. Even stunt bike guys, the first time they try a trick, freak out. Maybe not freak out, but they're like, maybe I'm not going to land it. I don't know. I can't land any stunts except for popping up a curb. That's it. All right? The point is, even though when we experienced riding a bike and we knew how to do it and done it for a while, it never eliminated all the doubt that we had riding that bike. Even though the doubts may have been small, we still had doubts when we tried to do things with it, when we'd go long distance or stuff like that. And the same things can be said of our faith. When we're younger in our faith, sometimes those doubts seem huge. And when we grow older, our doubts don't go away, but sometimes they're just small, infinitesimal, but they're still there. There's still things that we think about. And so this morning, I want to look at someone in the Bible who had doubts, and he addressed it in the right way possible. He addressed it in the way that he was supposed to. And so if you have your Bibles, if you want to open them up to Mark, not John, Mark chapter 9, and it's going to be in verse 20. And so if you know the story, right before this, Jesus was up on the mountain. He was with Peter, James, and John in the Transfiguration, where Elijah and Moses were there. And then they came down off the mountain, and Jesus finds his disciples and the Pharisees arguing, and he finds a man and his son. And so that's where we're picking up this story. In verse 20, it says, "So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth." Okay, this guy's got some serious stuff wrong with him, right? This kid he was like me when I was a kid. I'm just kidding. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," Jesus said, "everything is possible for one who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me with overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said he was dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up to his feet, and he stood up. Now, I want you to imagine with me that one of your children, or maybe a sibling, or somebody that you know are struggling with something. It could have been an illness. It could have been something physical that they just had their whole life, general health issues, whatever it is. And you and your parents have done everything in the world to get that person better, to make it so that they were perfectly healthy, right? Right? You went to every doctor. You went to every specialist. You even found an essential oils guru, and they couldn't even help, right? Nothing helped. No amount of peppermint, no amount of essential oils could cure what they had. I threw that in there for Amy and Adrian because it's like, you have a headache? Here's peppermint, right? Sorry. Nothing could cure them. But then you heard of this guy, this man named Jesus. And you heard that he heals people just like your son, just like your relative, just like the person you know. You would take your child or your family to him in a heartbeat if you knew that he could, just even the slightest hope that he could do it. But even though you knew that that he's done it before, even though you knew that he'd healed people like your son before or whatever it was, you would still have doubts because everything that you have done before has failed. And even though you know Jesus has done it, you'd still have doubts that he could do it for you, right? Now you know what the father in the story was probably going through. In the verses before this, you see the father brought his son to the disciples. And even Jesus' disciples couldn't heal the son, couldn't set him free from what he was going through. So you can imagine what he's going through here in the story and the heart behind his statement when he says, "I do believe, help my unbelief." He had doubts. Maybe he had been around Jesus. He had seen Jesus being healed. He had seen Jesus doing all these things and heard it. But when it came to his problem and his situation, maybe he had doubts. He just didn't believe enough or whatever it was. He stated, "I do believe." He had the head knowledge. He knew that Jesus could, but something deep inside of him still doubted that it would happen. That's such a raw expression of what some of us feel in our own walks with God. We have the head knowledge. We know that Jesus says that he can do things, but sometimes that head doesn't transfer to the heart. Sometimes that head doesn't transfer to us. We have that head knowledge, but it doesn't quite happen the way we want it to. We see verses in the Bible like in James chapter 1 where it tells us, "But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave in the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind." Or in Mark chapter 11 it says, "Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountains, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him." We see these verses in the Bible and we feel like our own doubts, man, I must be sinning. I see these verses in the Bible that are talking about doubt. I must be doing something wrong. But that's not the case. That's not the case. What we can take from these verses that we read, the number one thing that I want you guys, if you get nothing else, get this statement right here. It's when we have doubts, we should seek after Jesus, who is faithful to see us through. When we have doubts, we should seek after Jesus, who is faithful to see us through. Guys, doubts are going to come. Doubts in your walk with Jesus are going to come. It's what we do with those doubts that matter. You see, the man, instead of going out and just doing whatever, he went to Jesus. He's like, help me with my unbelief. Guys, Jesus will see us through those doubts. Jesus will see us through our problems. And so that leads us to the first point. Having doubts is normal. Even some of the greatest in the Bible doubted. Having doubts is normal. Even some of the greatest in the Bible doubted. Think of John the Baptist. He literally baptized Jesus. Knew who Jesus was. Says, I'm not even fit to carry this guy's sandals. And then later on in Matthew, what does he do? He sends his believers, his followers out. Hey, go ask Jesus if he is who we're looking for. It's like, dude, you just baptized him. You knew who he was. There was a dove and light that came from heaven. This is my son who I am well pleased. Right? What's going on? John the Baptist doubted. Thomas followed Jesus around. He was there when Jesus was crucified. And he knew Jesus said he was going to rise again. But Thomas still doubted. He's like, I'm not going to believe until I touch the holes in his hands and in his side. It's just not going to happen. Peter, walking on the water. Can you imagine? There's a big storm. You see a guy who's Jesus walking towards you on the water. And you're the boldest one who says, Jesus, if that's really you, call me out. Call me out to you. Let me walk on the water with you. And Jesus is like, all right, get out of the boat. He was brave enough to get out of the boat, and he walked on water. But then the waves and the wind scared him, and he doubted, and he started to sink. The dude was walking on water. I'm like, seriously? But yet he still doubted. Gideon needed reassurance. God's like, hey, Gideon, I want you to go and conquer this army for me. Set the Israelites free. And Gideon's like, dude, I'm the smallest of the smallest tribe. I'm the runt. You really want me to do this? And so he needed reassurance from God. Sarah and Abraham. Did it flicker? No. All right. Sarah and Abraham with God's promise of a child. God says, hey, I'm going to give you a child. And Sarah's like, no, you're not. I'm old. And he's older. This just ain't going to happen. So even the greatest people in the Bible doubted. Having doubts doesn't make you a bad Christian. It doesn't mean that you don't trust God's work in your life. It's a normal emotion that every sane person is going to struggle with in our life. We're going to come up against things that we don't understand. We're going to come up against things that maybe we can't control, and that's going to cause us to doubt. It's just something that's going to happen. We're going to have doubts when we're following God's plan. Is this what God really wants me to do? Do I really need to talk to that person? God, are you sure? Last time I talked to that person, they almost hit me. That's a little sketchy, God. Why is it so hard? Why do I feel like everything that I'm doing is going in the wrong direction? God, why? This is your plan. Why am I going through this? Why do I keep struggling with these things? God, you said you could set me free. Why isn't it happening? The father in the story had to have heard what Jesus could do. That's the reason that he brought his son. But the failure of the disciples in the previous verses, and maybe the previous failures of doctors and other people, caused him to doubt. It planted that seed of doubt in his heart. He had to wonder if there was anything that anyone could do for his son. But even in the moment of his doubt, in the midst of all the questions, he put it all in the hands of Jesus. He says, I do believe, help my unbelief. You got to imagine that moment, that raw moment where he's like, God, I've done everything. I've done everything I can. I believe that you can do this, but yet there's still something inside of me. Help me, Jesus. That's the moment he was in. He had done everything possible for him, and he still had that doubt, and he's just like, God, it's all up to you. Help me. And that's the thing, is our doubts should lead us to seek after Jesus. The man said, help my unbelief. He knew that he should trust Jesus, but there was something inside of him that pushed back against it, something that created that little twinge of doubt. And instead of listening to his doubt and allowing it to take him away from Jesus, he did the one thing that we should do when we have doubts, when we're doubting God, is we should run to him. We should seek after him. He was honest with Jesus. He was honest with himself. He knew that his faith in that moment was lacking. His faith was failing, but he also knew the answer was right in front of him. The answer was Jesus. So he did the only thing that he could do. He turned towards Jesus. When we have doubts, it should push us back into God's word. It should push us back into God's work, back into prayer, back into the arms of Jesus. Guys, what better place for us to solve our doubts, to get rid of them, than with the one who created us, with the one who designed us with a purpose? If we have doubts, we should turn towards him. When you were learning to ride that bike, hopefully you didn't give up after the first time you wrecked. Hopefully your doubts didn't overcome you. I'm like, man, I just can't do this, Dad, Mom, it's just terrible. Hopefully that wasn't your reaction. Hopefully you decided to pick yourself up and go to your parents and be like, all right, what did I do wrong? And your parents are like, well, you're supposed to ride a bike upright, not leaning to the side. Just saying. Hopefully you went back to the people who knew more. We need to turn to Jesus, who gives us the advice and help we need in the midst of our doubts. And here's a really big point. Jesus doesn't abandon us in our doubts. So many people believe that if you doubt in God, you doubt whatever his plan is for your life, then Jesus gives up on you. And a lot of churches believe that you need better faith. You need to have stronger faith. You need to do this right. So many people believe that, but yet Jesus doesn't abandon us. He's not going to kick you to the curb if you doubt his plan for your life. It's just not going to happen. Your parents didn't disown you for messing up on the bike one time, right? Hopefully they didn't. Hopefully they're like, all right, let's put a Band-Aid on your scrape, put you back on the bike, and get back on there. Let's go. Get on it. That's what Jesus does. He's like, all right, let's take care of this doubt, and then let's get you back on the road towards where I want you to be. The man cried out, I do believe, help me with my unbelief. And a lot of churches would expect this. And Jesus admonished him for his poor faith and told him to come back when he truly believed. How could you doubt me? I'm the Savior. I'm the Messiah. That's not what happened. Jesus healed his son, drove out the demon, and the man's faith was restored. You got to imagine when Jesus reached down to take that kid's hand and pulled him up, the dad's got to just be bawling. He just had to have lost it. One, because his faith in Jesus was restored, and two, his son's better. I mean, he looks like he's dead, but he's alive, right? He doesn't have the demon anymore. He doesn't have the things that made him get thrown into the fire. Jesus doesn't abandon us. Go back to that list of people I talked about. Jesus sent John's disciples back and said, I am the one who came. Look at all the things that I'm doing and all the things that I've fulfilled. Now you know I am. You look at Thomas. Thomas literally got to touch Jesus in the holes in his hands, in the holes in his side. He knew that Jesus was the one and that he was resurrected. With Peter, you got to imagine Jesus. Jesus probably had been with Peter so long, and Peter was the guy who stuck his foot in his mouth all the time. But he got out of the boat, and you got to imagine Jesus be like, dude, Peter, you walked on the water. Now I have to save you? But Jesus still did. He reached out his hand, took Peter's hand, and saved him. Gideon was twice reassured by God with the fleece. Gideon's like, all right, I'm going to put this fleece, let all the dew around it be, or let all the ground around it be covered with dew, but not the fleece. And he's like, it happens, right? I don't know about you, but if I go outside and something doesn't have dew on it after I ask God to not to make it happen, I'd be like, all right, God, that's it. But Gideon's like, no, all right, God, let's do this differently this time. I'm putting the fleece out, make dew on the fleece, but not the ground. He needed it twice, but yet it happened. Abraham and Sarah had their promise fulfilled. I don't know how much more that you could not doubt anymore when you're like 190 years old. Not 190. Abraham was 100, Sarah was 90, and you have a child. That will take all your doubts away. God can show his power through our doubts. He can reassure us of his goodness, his power, and his love. Guys, in the midst of our biggest struggles, in the midst of our biggest doubts, is sometimes when God could show his love and his power more thoroughly than any other time, because we have to rely on him. When we do it right and we come to him, we have to rely on him, then he shows his power. And the last thing is, having doubts doesn't nullify God's work within us. So many times we believe because of our doubts, because of our unbelief, that God simply can't work in us. So many times we feel like those doubts nullify what God wants to do in us, and that's not true. God still works within us. God still does everything. And you know what? Because we have those doubts and we feel like we can't do it, we rely on God more, and he gets to show his power more. And we understand in that moment that it's truly God. Because we're like, God, I didn't believe. I didn't know. It's all you. Our doubts don't disqualify us from being used by God. It's what we do with them that does. Do we turn to Jesus and let him have the glory? Do we turn to Jesus and let him solve our problems and let him take away those doubts and show us who he truly is? Or do we turn towards the world? Do we turn towards what the world has to say? And that's the final thing. It all comes down to what you do with your doubts. Do you turn to Jesus or not? So I'm going to ask the worship team to come back up here. Guys, everyone is going to doubt in their lives. It's just a fact of life. And as we grow closer to Jesus, those doubts get smaller and smaller because we see what Jesus has done in us. We see the power that Jesus has had in our lives. The question is not if we're going to doubt. When we doubt, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to turn towards Jesus? Are we going to allow him to help us in our unbelief? Or are we just going to turn towards the world and say, God, my doubts have overcome me and I'm done. I don't believe anymore. What is your answer to that question? This morning, as you look at the sheet that I gave you, the handout, if you have it, on the bottom, there's a whole bunch of blank lines. I don't know about you, but there was a lot of times in my life where I doubted God. I doubted that God even exists in a few points. And I sought after him, and I sought after him, and I was like, God, I don't know what's going on. God, I don't know what to do anymore. I need you. Show yourself to me. And God was faithful. He showed himself to me in so many different ways. I have a really funny story about one way. You guys can ask me after service if you want to know. But God will reveal himself to you if you ask him. And so on the bottom, the instructions are there. If you have doubts about God, doubts about his plan for your life, doubts about the things that are just going on around you, and you're saying, God, why is this happening? Just write them on there. And then take some time and go to God with those doubts. Say, God, this is what I'm struggling with. God, I believe that you're still Lord, but help me in these things. Help my unbelief in these things. So I'm going to say a prayer, and I just encourage you guys on that paper just to find a place with God. Anywhere. It could be now. It could be after service. It could be at home when you're sitting next to the fire because it's cold outside. Whatever it might be. But just find a place where you can say, God, these are my doubts, and help me overcome them. Help my unbelief. Heavenly Father, God, we looked at the man in the story. God, this man who did everything that he could to solve his problems, his son's problems. And God, it didn't work. And even your disciples couldn't heal him. And so when he came to you, he had this raw moment of tension in his life where he's like, God, I know, I've seen it, I've heard about it happening, that you healed people, but I still doubt, God. And God, you revealed yourself to him. You healed his son. So as the people in this room and online, God, they're struggling with whatever it might be, God. Maybe it's your plan for their life. They're like, God, how is that possible? How can I do that? Or maybe, God, it's just as simple as, God, I'm not even sure you're real. I'm not even sure you exist. But God, whatever their doubts are, whether it's for your plan for their life, whether it's for whatever it is, God, I just ask that you would reveal yourself to them. God, that just like Jesus in the story, where he healed the man's son, he overcame the man's unbelief and said, I'm still God. God, do that in our lives. Do that with our doubts. Do that with the things that we're struggling with. God, we just love you. We're going to sing this last song. It's called Good, Good Father. And in the midst of this song, I just encourage you to fill out that bottom of that paper and just approach God with whatever's going on in your life.